Whole. Okay, so let's start the class. Last class what we were discussing was we were talking about the process called as megasporogenesis. What was megasporogenesis? The process of formation of megaspores from the megaspore mother cell is called as megasporogenesis. Talking about the megaspore mother cell, who forms the megaspore mother cell? The cell of a nucellus, right? And that cell should be towards which area? Either the cellagel or the micropyle. So, we have discussed that it should be in the micropylar area. The nucellar cell should be in the micropylar area, which enlarges and ultimately it converts itself to MMC, right? And after that they formed a collection or a group of 4 megaspores, and out of the megaspores what we remember is one of them remain functional and 3 of them they degenerate, right? We have drawn a structure about the process, right, and we have drawn something called as the embryo sac, where we have seen a 7 cell and 8 nucleate structure. So, today we are going to start a discussion from that point. Yeah. Megasporangium কাৰণ তাৰ ভিতৰত তোমাৰ এগটো থাকিব ন সেই দুটা words অকমান confusing it's a female gametophyte actually একেটাই বস্তু কাৰণ ovule টো ভিতৰতে তো embryo sac থাকিব it's the same thing no কাৰণ ovule বুলি কেতিয়া কম যেতিয়া তোমাৰ ovary ৰ ভিতৰত ovule আছে development হৈ যোৱাৰ পিছত ultimately আমি কি বুলি কয় embryo sac বুলি কওঁ so ovule and embryo sac এটা বস্তু ঠিক আছে always was a micropylar end. Egg apparatus called a micropylar end. Whole? Okay. So, we will be talking about this female gametophyte or the embryo sac and please egg to derike ahiba tar pisot kotha pati ahiba hoy na hoy. Okay, last class we have talked about some certain words called as monosporic, bisporic, tetrasporic, etc. What we remember from the discussion is ekita words kihor logot related monosporic embryo sac, bisporic embryo sac, or it could be a tetrasporic embryo sac, and the most common that we are going to talk about is obviously the monosporic embryo sac. What is the difference between the 3 words monosporic, bisporic? Depending upon the number of functional megaspores. Out of the 4 megaspores, if one is functional, the embryo sac would be called as a monosporic embryo sac, and similarly the rest of the explanation. Duta hole bisporic hobo, and if all the 4 would be functional, then it would be called as a tetrasporic embryo sac. So, embryo sac or structure to see to him. Diagram I think we have already drawn in the last class. No, we don't need to draw the diagram again. So, duta man point likhi lo. Yeah, please. Okay, আমি notes খিনি লিখি লওঁ right? So this is the first, the starting point about the female gametophyte. What is the point that is important from this part, from examination point of view, is the name first. ঠিক আছে, classification কোনে দিছিলে, embryo sac or study কোনে কৰিছে, we always remember Maheshwari, right? Next is embryo sac 3 types, we understood the meaning. What is important again is the examples. So nothing details of ketiao nahe, right? If you are going to study the structure of a tetrasporic embryo sac or the structure of a bisporic embryo sac, it's a huge amount of information that you have to study, but that part is not required in your course. So there is no point of studying in details, right? So we will be talking about only the monosporic polygonum type of embryo sac in details. Baki kita details of nalage, kintu examples important. Examples of question ahe, allium would be an example of dash type of a embryo sac, and out of all this maximum question has been asked about these part, right? So most probably plumbago dibo pare, edoxa dibo pare, but tetrasporic embryo sac kar ase hekini dibo pare. So examples are important, baki sentence not important. Tar bitor question has been asked about fertile area. Ei saita upor question eta paperomia iman aha nai, ei saita ahise kintu aru ei saita bitor to jodi common lage fertile area and plumbago, that has been asked mostly, right? And what we will be discussing is, eta to discuss koribo lagibo, we will be talking about polygonum type of monosporic embryo sac. We will take this example to describe the structure. So etu jedi hol heading koriba monosporic polygonum embryo sac. I think this part is over. এটো পাঠ হল হ্যাঁ Okay, ekhini portion to bujabo laga nai, we understood, no? So we have to write certain informations about the egg and the synergids. From this portion, maximum question has been asked from which point? Janu ne? Embryo sac or maximum question eta cellor upor basically ahise. Central cell, yes, because for the formation of endosperm, and also about the function of a synergid, right? So what we know, whenever we talk about synergid, I think you remember a word called as Filiform Apparatus. Right. So the question that is asked is, who develops the Filiform apparatus? Where can you find the Filiform apparatus, and what is the function of the Filiform apparatus? Filiform apparatus of function ki ase. What is the Filiform apparatus? A thread-like structure that comes out from the synergids. Where exactly can you find it? It is inside the embryo sac, or sometimes it comes out of the embryo sac also, because these are thread-like structures. What is the function? It guides the pollen tube towards what? Towards the egg. Right? I think you all remember a word called as obturator. Morphology mo eta bostu koisilo obturator. I don't know whether you remember or not. As far as guiding the pollen tube is concerned, not duta words associated or duta structure associated. Eta hol obturator and the other is Filiform apparatus. Both of them works as what is their function? They guide the pollen tube towards fertilization or towards the egg. But you have to be precise as to obturator e kuntu time ba kunkhini roke guide kore aru Filiform apparatus e ki guide kore. If you talk about obturator guides the pollen tube towards the embryo sac. Obturator ki hoy? It is a flag-like structure that is found in the funicle of the ovule, right? Suppose we are talking about ovary like this, etu dhora right? Etu ki hoy? Funicle. Etu hol tumar ovary. If you are talking about again stigma, style and ovary like this, right? Just a rough diagram, okay? So sigma style and ovary, yate pollen ahile, pollen tube dal humale, humai pelai. It enters inside the ovary. It has to know where exactly the ovule is, right? So ovary to kunkhini chekat ovule to ase, it is guided by a flag-like structure that is called as obturator. What would the obturator do? It will guide the pollen tube towards the ovule. But once it enters inside the ovule, the main function is obviously to reach the egg. Right? Okol to ovule to humale no hobo, no? Ovule boli kole to you have so many cells, right? So it has to enter inside the egg, or it has to fertilize with the egg. So bhitorot ki hobo synergid cells bilakor ki thakibo Filiform apparatus thakibo. Ihote ki koribo pollen tube to ultimately egg hole they will direct. So both of them, what is the function? Guiding the pollen tube. But maximum question has been asked about the Filiform apparatus and not about the obturator. So whenever you see a question regarding guiding the pollen tube, generally in the option ki thakibo tomar Filiform apparatus. Obturator, it's not a very common thing that is asked in the exam. But you have to know, if suppose jodi ketiaba Filiform apparatus na thaki pele optional obturator ase, then the answer would be obturator. But in most of the cases, it will be Filiform apparatus, right? Okay. Next, the 7-celled 8-nucleus structure to open details of. So, likha single egg. What is the other name for an egg? Egg tuk aru ki boli koi? Or something that starts with O. Oosphere, oospore, duta word পঢ়িছিলো আমি oosphere কি oospore কি আৰু egg to কি বুলি কয় oosphere নে oospore oospore is the zygote oosphere is the egg right I think nothing to explain. Understood? Okay, ইয়াতে কি point পঢ়িব লাগিব? Because we will be comparing egg with the synergid. Synergid just ulta hobo, cellagel vacuole hobo, micropylar nucleus hobo, right? In case of this, we have micropylar vacuole and cellagel nucleus. Next, baki to I think it's understood. Wall of the egg is common with the synergid. I think we understand that point. No, they don't have a respective enequata structure or enequa extra ke tinta structure na thake. It is all fused together, so they have a common wall. It is the synergid hoy, it is the egg hoy, this is the common wall, right? Only after fertilization that the egg develops its own wall. It is talking about the location of the vacuole and the location of the nucleus. Egg ki hoy, it is a cell. If it is a cell, so obviously it will have a vacuole and it will have a nucleus also. Nucleus na thakibo niki cellot. Embryo sac ase, embryo sacot keita cell ase, 7ta cell ase. 7ta cellot out of the 7 cells, 6ta cellot ki thakibo, eta nucleus thakibo na thake. Thakibo, aru central cellot duta nucleus thakibo. So we know each and every cell will have a nucleus. So if egg is a cell, then it will also have a nucleus. Where exactly is the position of the nucleus? This is what the statement says. কি বস্তু? egg to micropylar end ot thake. Etu micropylar end, etu egg, etu synergid. ঠিক আছে? So etu jodi micropylar end hoy, ekhini ei tinta cellok ami ki boli kom egg apparatus, right? Eta if you are talking about this egg to eta respective cell hoy, right? Ei cell to nucleus thakibo na thake. Thakibo, to nucleus kun pine thakibo? Ei pine thakibo ne ei pine thakibo? বুঝি পাইছা? So egg to it has a central micropylar vacuole. Ekhini jegat tar eta dangor vacuole thakibo. Egg to kot thakibo? Sorry, nucleus to kot thakibo? Towards the cellagel area. Clear? Notes kini hol likha? Okay. Next likha the two synergids. Number 2. Okay. The two synergids they possess a micropartial nucleus and a cellagel vacuole. Next, what is important is they have the filiform apparatus, or from these cells the filiform apparatus arises. What is a filiform apparatus? It's a finger-like projection or thread-like structure composed of what? Composed of microfibrils. Remember the word microfibril. We have talked about what? Microtubules, microfibrils and intermediate fibers. Microfibrils are nothing but key protein structures, right? Hollow ne solid. Comparison between a microtubule and a microfibril. Microtubule is also a protein structure, microfibril is also a protein structure. We have talked about them during what? Cytoskeleton, right? So, we have three types of proteinaceous structures, that is microfibril, microtubules and intermediate fibers. Intermediate fibers are key point one forming a basket in and around the nucleus. Right, that's a line that's important. And if you are talking about microtubules and microfibrils, one is a solid one and the other is a hollow one. It is solid. Because if you talk about a tubule is a tube-like structure that is hollow inside, right? So, yate ki ase microfibrils, core of microfibrils, mane bahut kita microfibrils log lagi pelai eta collection form korise. That is what is called as a filiform apparatus that is surrounded by a sheath. Net, what is the function? Obviously, guiding the pollen tube hetu to eta function. Apart from that, they also helps in absorption and transportation of the nutrients for the growing embryo sac. Right? You know, out of all this, question has been asked about that last line, guiding the pollen grain. Next, likha antipodal cells. Huh. It all okay was. Okay, কি পেন বিলাকে লিখুতে কথা পাতে নেকি? Because you all don't talk, no? তোমালোকে কথা পাতা জানো? তোমালোকেতো কথা নাপাতা, পেন বিলাকে লিখি থাকোতে কথা পাতি আছে, no? Central cell, what is important? Before fertilization, 2 nuclei, initially 2 nuclei, just before fertilization the nuclei fuses and keep form kore secondary nucleus. So, secondary nucleus is a term, when will you use the term? When the 2 nuclei will fuse together and form one structure, right? Secondary nucleus. So, ultimately the male gamete fuses with the central cell, yes, but what? It fuses with the secondary nucleus to form PEN or primary endosperm nucleus, right? And ultimately it will form the endosperm. So, up till here what we have studied is, we have talked about the embryo sac in details. Whenever we talk about the embryo sac, it has a collection of 7 cells and a 8 nucleate structure. The points that are important is something that we have already discussed, right? What next? Since we are talking about sexual reproduction in flowering plants, we are concerned with fertilization also. Now, on one hand we have studied about the pollen grain that is ready, and on the other hand we have talked about the embryo sac that is ready. It is next ki hobo laibo, pollination hobo laibo, and after pollination fertilization will take place. So, the next point of study would be obviously pollination. But before writing pollination, duta man point likhi lo. Eto hol likhi lo. Points puli likhasun. So, out of this the question has been asked about point number 1 and point number 3. Normally, if we talk about the synergy, they are 2 in number. Certain plants they do not have a synergy, certain plants have 1 synergy only. Right? So, if this is over, next heading koriba pollination. लिखिलवा Okay, from the pollination section, what we have to study first, the definition of a pollination, everyone understands that, right? We don't have to write also. So, what is pollination? It is the transfer of the pollen grain from the anther of a flower to the stigma of another flower is called as pollination. Talking about types of pollination, pollination broadly divided into 2 types, that is self pollination and cross pollination. What is self pollination? Within the same flower or within the same plant, right? And if you are talking about cross pollination, obviously it involves the flowers of 2 different plants, right? So we have to study the types of why does a plant undergo self-pollination and why does a plant undergoes cross-pollination. This is something that we have to study, right? Adult plant or Mongolei cross-pollination, Mongolei self-pollination, it should have certain characteristics that favors self-pollination or certain characteristics that favors cross-pollination. So kunbila characteristic thakile self-pollination hobo, kunbila characteristic thakile cross-pollination hobo. This is something that we have to study. Plus, as far as self-pollination and cross-pollination is concerned, which process would be advantageous in case of a plant? Self-pollination advantageous or cross-pollination? Obviously cross-pollination. And what is the reason behind? Why is cross-pollination advantageous? Self-pollination hoye thakile ki hobo? The quality will degrade, no? Ultimately, at a time no variations, nothing. So ultimately it will lead to the degradation of its quality. Next, from this section, at a question or at a point you have to study at a diagrammatic based question something called as self-incompatibility. Self-incompatibility at a diagram at a diagram upor question no ekini post porhile hogol. So pollination heading koro. And obviously the factors or the agents that brings about pollination, no? Biotic agent and abiotic agents. So jehetu details nalage, I think writing like this also it's understood. Sentence to likhibo nalage. Ekita words to khunisa agote. Self-pollination, two types, right? It is autogamy and geitonogamy. If you are talking about autogamy, what we understand? This is the line, same flower, same plant. Etu jodi hoy, different flower, same plant. And cross-pollination is also called as allogamy or genogamy. Obviously, it involves two different plants. Geitonogamy, at a line you have to remember, since we are talking about different flowers, no? Adult plant or duta flower. So it could be also be considered as, according to some scientists, no, it's a type of cross-pollination also, right? So at a cross-pollination ki thakibo duta flower, dutal plant, yato duta flower ase. So kisumane a type of cross-pollination buliu koi, right? We'll be writing that sentence. Yeah, hate way, ecologically or genetically. Whole. Line to ako belek ke likhibo nalage yate likhe lwa. Second point eta likhibason ha yate. Understood, no? Genetically self-pollination, functionally or ecologically it is cross-pollination. Why it is called as self-pollination? Because we are talking about pollination within the same plant. Why it is called as cross-pollination? Because two flowers are involved. It line important, huh? It line Sabah. The next part is what are the factors that helps a plant to undergo self-pollination. Adult plant self-pollinate koribo lagile kisuman conditions lagibo. So we will be talking about factors that encourages self-pollination. Okay, self-pollination or factors that enhance. What is the most common factor that will help a plant to undergo self-pollination? Something about the sexuality of a flower. We have the two terms unisexual and bisexual. So unisexual hole self-pollination hobo na bisexual hole self-pollination. Unisexual hole kenike self-pollination hobo. It is bisexual, they will have both the sex organs together. So ultimately ki hobo tahantor self-pollination. So one of the factors that enhances self-pollination is bisexuality, right? Bisexuality to aru likhi dibo na lage ne likhi dibo laibo. I think it's understood. Homogamy. Homo is same, gamy is marriage. So what we are talking about? We are talking about the maturing of the reproductive structures at the same time. If suppose we are talking about a bisexual flower, so obviously it will have the androecium and the gynoecium. If androecium matures first or gynoecium matures first, if there is a time difference, then obviously they will not go for self-pollination. So tahator ki dorkar hobo that one of the most important requirement is they should mature at the same time and ultimately fertilize. Okay, the next factor, cleistogamy. I think you have heard the words called as chasmogamous flowers and a cleistogamous flowers. What is a cleistogamous flower? A closed flower is called as a cleistogamous. What we understand by the word closed? Closed flower mane ki? The petals do not open up, right? So flower is closed, means petals, sepals, they will never open up, they will stay as a closed structure. And if you are talking about the normal flowers that we see, they are all examples of chasmogamous or open flower. So if it is a closed flower, then they are bound to undergo what? Self-pollination or cross-pollination? Obviously, I mean self-pollination. So yet a sentence likhibole honike. Now again, no, I'll just write cleistogamous or cleistogamous flower is equal to closed flower, no? out of these points that we are talking about, no, maximum question has been asked about cleistogamy itself. So example to dibo, cleistogamy example, the plant that shows cleistogamous, and the question that is asked is, this type of a plant will undergo dash type of a pollination, self-pollination and cross-pollination. So you have to remember the example, right? Our cleistogamy example will equal it. The most common one is obviously key, viola. Viola or question to I hit a and viola. Third point, at a point likha. Okay, likhi lo. Right. So pollination is of two types, self-pollination and cross-pollination. There are certain factors that enhances self-pollination, certain factors that enhances cross-pollination. So these four are the factors that helps a plant to undergo self-pollination. Our continuous self-pollination, obviously it's harmful. We had a word for that. Heard this word called as inbreeding depression, right? Inbreeding depression ki hor, mane what does it mean? Degradation of the quality because of continuous self-pollination, no? So self-pollination continuously hole adult plant or ki hobo? Inbreeding depression hobo. So it will suffer from depression and tension like human beings, no? So plants are depression hoita mane. Okay. Next, so what are the factors? Bisexuality we understood, homogamy we understood, cleistogamy we understood. The fourth factor is bud pollination. What is bud pollination? The pollination occurs during the bud stage itself. So what we have written, if the self-pollination occurs before the opening of a flower, before the opening of a flower, the statement cannot be referred to as cleistogamy. Cleistogamy aru etu sentence duita beleg kintu yate ki hoy it is a chasmogamous flower but before opening pollination occurs kintu cleistogamy ki hoy it never opens up. Understood? So yate ki hoy closed, yate ki hoy it is an example of a open flower kintu pollination ketia hobo before opening of a flower ne after opening of the flower, it is before opening, and this process is called as anthesis. Not very important, kintu examples kini important, rice, wheat, pisum, etc. Right? And the process that is called as anthesis mane ki the process of opening of a flower is called as anthesis. So egita asil factors enhancing self pollination. Next likha contrivances for cross pollination. And if you talk about factors helping cross pollination, so egita to bujiye pao just the opposite hobo unisexuality in case of cross pollination, bisexuality in case of self pollination. If you are talking about maturing time, homogamy, heterogamy. Okay, so talking about unisexuality, we understood a meaning to Rani Bolebo, also called as. Next, dichogamy, sexes mature at different timings, and if you are talking about maturing at different timings, either the androecium will mature first or the gynoecium will mature first. So accordingly, we have two terms, proto-andry, androecium matures first, right? Self pollination তাহাঁতৰ চোৱা এটা তোমাৰ structure compact structure এটা তাতে তোমাৰ anther আছে stigma আছে তো anther to যেতিয়া mature হ'ব হি burst হ'বই burst যেতিয়া হ'ব তাৰ pollen grains বিলাক ওলাব pollen grains বিলাক ওলাই পেলাই ক'ত পৰিব pollen grain to কেনেকৈ আহিব যদি pollen grain to বেলেগৰ পৰা আহে তেতিয়াহ'লে তো self pollination নহবই সেইটো তো cross pollination হ'ব so clistogamas কাৰণে তো self pollination হয় they are not dependent on others pollen grains they are self sufficient so eta flower আছে just think of a round structure eto eta flower to bhitor male part female part duita ase so male part female part je duita ase tahator majot pollination hobo nohoy nije koribo he kan to self right so anther to phati pelai jo pollen grains bile kula ahibo so anther jeta mature hoy it has to burst so burst koile pollen grains ulabo pollen grains ulai pele kot poribo in normal cases the pollen grains are carried right agents bilak ase air water insects etc yate ki hobo jehetu eta closed structure tatei poribo no so self pollination hobo Unisexually at a point roi goisile either if you have space you can write it down there or you can write it down as an extra point also dicliny or unisexuality ki hoy so you have one male flower you have one female flower if both of them are formed in one plant it is called as ki monoecious jodi beleg plant ase no a male plant is different from the female plant that is called as dioecious right so unisexuality could be seen in case of monoecious for example dioecious for example adult plant ore duta beleg flower thakibo nwaribo niki adult plant duta beleg flower eta male flower eta female flower ar dioecious ot male plant dal totally beleg female plant dal totally beleg বুজি পাইছে এটো adult plant ot duta flower hetu dual plant ot duta flower understood কিমান আছিল এটো নাম্বার 2 আছিল নেকি এটা 3 এবিলাক এক্সপ্লেইন কৰিব নালাগে Gynosagia মনত আছে যোনে মৰফলজি পঢ়িছে because we have done that Gynosagium is an example of a natural barrier Gynosagium মানে কি কেতিয়া কোনটো বেৰিয়াৰক আমি Gynosagium বুলি কম Morphology assignment discussion completed chapter completed পঢ়া শুনা completed this one not completed no হ'ব So if suppose we are talking about a bisexual flower, right? So bisexual flower ki thakibo male or female part ekelege thakibo, right? In spite of that, if they undergo cross pollination, normally bisexual flower tat ki hoy self pollination, kintu bisexual flower tut if they have a natural barrier in the form of Gynosagium, then obviously self pollination is not possible. Karon tomar eta flower thakibo flower to eto you'll have the stigma and you have the stamen tar majote kiba ta jodi structure eta thake diwar type na wall te eto kene mix hobo to noare so ultimately they will depend for cross pollination right so the presence of a natural barrier also enhances cross pollination a natural barrier jodi present hoy the process is called as ki Homogamy Gynosagium more to morat rakhiba Homogamy complete whole. The next factor that enhances cross pollination is pre-potency. What is pre-potency? So adult planters jodi pre-potency thake tetia hole cross pollination hobo. What is pre-potency? Read the sentence and see what you have understood. Statement to buzi paiso ne pre-potency statement pollen grains of one flower germinates more rapidly over the stigma of another flower as compared to its own flower understood eta flower ase duita sex organs ase so tahate ki koribo laisil pollen should have fallen on the stigma of its own flower Kintu, when we talk about pollination, no, pollen grains we have to enuka nohoy that they will be sent to only into a specific location. Along with the wind or other factors, they might move anywhere, right? So once they move to different places, so there are certain conditions where the pollen grain falls into the same flower, there are certain conditions where the pollen grain falls into another flower. So eta stage of pollen grain to nizor tate porile, eta stage of, so swap. We have this flower, no? Yate ki ase? Anther, yate ki ase? Stigma, right? So this anther bursts and the pollen grains comes out. So sometimes some of the pollen grains might fall here also, because you cannot control the movement of the pollen grain, right? Yato poribo pare, same flower, or yate beleg eta flower ase, tate goi pelai tu pollen grain to poribo pare. So the same pollen grain, one condition in the same flower, other condition in a different flower. But as far as maturing is concerned or germinating is concerned, fast germination kot hoise beleg flower porile. Jeti beleg flower pore, then obviously it is what? Cross pollination. So enukwa eta condition of ki hobo, cross pollination would be more frequently observed, right? And the last point is self-incompatibility. Whenever we talk about self-incompatibility, what we understand? There is a factor because of which self-pollination does not occur. Self-incompatible means what? It's not fertile, it cannot fertilize, that is what is called as incompatible, and generally this word is related to which part of the plant body? The pollen grain and the pollen tube. Right. So male part or logot hai self incompatibility word to associated hoy. It is either the failure of the pollen grain to do certain types of function, or it is the failure of the pollen tube to do certain type of function. As a result ki hoy self pollination no hoy pelai cross pollination hoy. Is the concept clear? So self incompatibility is the failure of the pollen grain or the pollen tube. Kiba ta conditions kiba ki bhi problem hoy, so it cannot fertilize. Right. So what is we were talking about? So heading kora self incompatibility bracket or sterility. It is also called as sterility. Is this over? So sentence of nilikho. So what is self-incompatibility? Both of them are functionally perfect, but in spite of that, fertilization does not occur, right? So if you are talking about the female part, that is also fit. If you are talking about the pollen grain, that is also fit. But in spite of that, if they do not undergo fertilization or set seed or form seed, that is what is called as self-incompatibility. ইমান মুখস্থ কৰিব নালাগে ঠিক আছে you have just to know the concept right so self incompatibility why it is called as incompatible because it cannot set seed right fertilization hoise kintu seed set kora nai ba fertilization hobo para nai because of that process is called as self incompatibility is a result of what is a result of failure of whom problems either in the pollen or problems either in the pollen tube right baki khini mukhosto nokoriba no point ha only khaiso there might be certain types of environmental resistance there might be certain types of hormones there might be certain types of enzymes that are responsible even in case of human beings or other organisms also ami to dekhu no self sterility if you are talking about human beings or you are talking about any higher organism in spite of the fact that they are perfectly all right tar pisoto they cannot fertilize hobo pare no so because of certain environmental conditions because of certain hormonal conditions etc a common abnormality dekha pai right So when we are writing the note, it is a huge note, no? You don't have to by heart, just read once before going to exam, right? So iman details of question na hai. What is the cause for self-incompatibility? Generally na hai. What is self-incompatibility? Self-incompatibility is a phenomenon through which, because of which the plant fails to set seed. Right? It is because of failure or certain types of defects. Where can you see the defect? Either in the pollen grain or in the pollen tube, or sometimes this might be also a condition. Because of these reasons, ki hoy seed set no hoy, he karone ami ki boli ko self incompatible. I think the time is over, no? ইয়াতে অকমান আমি কন্টিনিউ কৰিব লাগিব as far as the diagram is concerned, no, but questions কেনেকে আহে. So this is something that we are going to write in the next class, right? We'll be continuing this part itself. Thank you.